Who were the crawlers? In the richest empire on earth, some women were too weak to stand.
In 1877, social photographer John Thompson and journalist Adolph Smith revealed a hidden reality in their work Street Life in London. They documented a group known as the crawlers. These were not ordinary beggars. They were elderly widows, discarded servants, broken laborers, people whose bodies had been destroyed by 14-hour workdays. They had no trade, no savings, no pension. Hunger slowed their movements. Cold stiffened their joints. They crouched against walls to conserve warmth. They did not walk through London. They shuffled. They crouched. Some moved on all fours. They were called crawlers not as an insult, but as a description of what poverty had done to the human body. They were not lazy. They were used up.
They did not live in houses. They did not live in rooms. They did not even live in slums. The crawlers lived on stone, on the cold steps of the Shorts Gardens workhouse, in the shadow of Covent Garden Market, against damp brick walls where fog clung like a second skin. They could not afford the four-penny coffins, narrow wooden boxes where the homeless slept upright, so they slept sitting. Year after year, through freezing rain and London's bitter winter fog, they remained outside. Their beds were staircases, their blankets were rags, their ceiling was the sky. When night fell, the gas lamps flickered, and the city stepped over them. Some tried to enter the casual ward, the government shelter, but shelter came with a price. Break stones, pick oakum, work for your bed. Most crawlers were too weak to lift a hammer, so the doors closed, and they returned to the pavement. Not because they chose the street, but because the system chose to discard them.
Hunger does not shout. It slows you down. It weakens the knees, dims the eyes, and turns dignity into desperation. For the crawlers, survival came from what others had already thrown away, used tea leaves. They would wait behind coffee houses, near kitchen doors, asking not for fresh food, but for what had already been boiled once, wet, bitter, flavorless. They carried these sodden leaves in scraps of paper or cloth. If they were lucky, a sympathetic shopkeeper would give them a little hot water. They did not drink the tea, they ate the leaves, to trick the stomach, to silence the pain, to survive another night. On better days, they scavenged Covent Garden's refuse, rotten cabbage, bruised apples, bones stripped of meat. This was not theft. This was the economy of waste. An empire built on global trade, while its own elderly citizens lived on recycled tea. Hunger does not scream in photographs. It crouches quietly on the pavement.
Among the crawlers, there was one woman whose story shocked London. She sat on the cold stone steps of Shorts Gardens, not alone. In her arms was a baby. The child was not hers. She was a widow, discarded by her trade, turned away by family, too old to work, too poor to rest. But she could still hold a child. Poor working mothers, women scrubbing floors or serving in coffee shops, left their infants with her during the day. Not in a nursery, not in a home, on the pavement. For nearly 8 hours, she cared for the baby in exchange for a crust of bread and a cup of tea. Sometimes she received neither. When winter wind cut through the streets, she pulled the infant under her torn shawl. The baby's small head would press beneath her chin. She once said, "It keeps me warm, as I keep it warm." In a city that stepped over her, this child was the only warmth she had left. Poverty had taken her home, her family, her strength, but not her humanity.
In Victorian Britain, poverty was not seen as misfortune. It was seen as failure. The Poor Laws promised relief, but relief came at a cost. To enter a workhouse meant surrendering your name, your clothes, your family. Husbands separated from wives, children taken from mothers, uniforms replacing identity. Inside, discipline ruled. Stone floors, thin gruel, hard labor. Break stones, pick oakum from old ropes, work for your survival. For the young and strong, it was humiliation. For the crawlers, it was impossible. Many were too weak to lift a hammer, too frail to stand for hours. So when they approached the casual ward, the overnight shelter for the destitute, they were told to work for their bed. If they could not, the doors closed, and they returned to the pavement. Not because they refused help, but because help demanded strength they no longer possessed. The system was designed for labor, and when their labor was gone, so was their value.
The crawlers did not simply vanish. The world changed around them. In 1865, a new movement began. The Salvation Army opened shelters and cheap food depots, places that did not demand hard labor in exchange for survival. For the first time, some elderly poor had somewhere to go besides stone steps. By the late 1880s, London's worst slums were demolished. St. Giles, Seven Dials. The city widened its streets and erased the places where crawlers once huddled. But the true turning point came in 1908. The Old Age Pensions Act 1908 granted small government pensions to the elderly poor. It was not generous, it was not immediate, but it meant this: old age no longer guaranteed starvation. Slowly, the sight of women crouched on workhouse steps began to disappear, not because poverty ended, but because society finally admitted that a human life was worth more than its labor. The crawlers were never a social class. They were evidence of a system that forgot compassion, and a reminder of what happens when productivity becomes the measure of worth. Empty stone steps at dawn, fog lifting, gas lamps fading, no one there. Hold frame 6 seconds. Fade to black. Silence.